This is a screenshot video of the posting that I put up, the first posting for weeks 3 to 4 in the civil practice course, diversity jurisdiction in federal court and piercing the corporate veil. And it's in conjunction, let me scroll up to the first page, it's in conjunction with Buffalo Creek disaster. And there are a couple of points that I believe need elaboration for you to have a full sense of what Mr. Stern, the plaintiff's attorney, was attempting to do as he ultimately brought this lawsuit in the federal court system as opposed to the West Virginia state court system. So what we start out with is the differences between federal and state law. So imagine, if you will, that we have identified a rule of law that's in effect in the United States. What I'm saying to you is that we could place that rule of law in either the federal side of the ledger, meaning it's a federal law, or we could put it on the state law side of the ledger, meaning it's a state law. When we're talking, by the way, about state law, so let's assume we're talking about New York state law, sometimes we think about not only state law, but state and local law. And the reason for that add-on of local law is that there are a number of governmental subdivisions in New York State, and all the other states for that matter, that have the ability to pass laws. So, for example, in New York State, we have the state legislature that can pass laws, but also here in the city of Buffalo, we have the Buffalo Common Council, which is the legislative body for the city of Buffalo, and it too can pass laws. So we could say on one side federal laws and on the other side state and local laws. I've identified some categories of federal law just so we can get a flavor. So I have immigration law, bankruptcy law, social security law, the various civil rights laws, and anti-discrimination laws, patent and copyright laws, federal laws that are regulating interstate waterways, about which I know nothing, federal criminal laws, such as the laws against tax fraud. Then we could look at state laws. And as I say, state laws are in effect in a particular state. So the state law of New York is not the same as the state law of Ohio, by way of example. And so we have these categories of state law. We have state criminal law, but then we have divorce law, family law matters, wills, inheritances, and estates, real estate, business contracts. The law of contracts is state law, in other words. Personal injury. So sometimes the personal injury laws are more specific, not sometimes, all the time. So the mother of all personal injury laws is the tort of negligence. There's other ones like products liability, but the tort of negligence is the big one. That's the kind of law that the lawyers who you see on billboards are essentially asking you to come to them in other words, to assert a claim under the New York law of negligence. Workers' comp is another area of state law. You'll again see that I put local laws in effect at the New York State county, cities, towns, and villages. One of our big local laws is the zoning ordinances. So, for example, I own a home in the city of Buffalo. It's restricted, or I'm restricted as the property owner in terms of how I can use the home. So I can't change it into a funeral home, for example. I don't know why I'd want to. But when we turn our attention now to the Buffalo Creek disaster, the attorney for the plaintiffs, Gerald Stern, concluded as you're reading the books, you'll see this, that the most effective law to bring in the greatest amount of compensation for his clients would be the state law of West Virginia, and specifically the laws of recklessness and negligence, or that tort law I was referring to just a while ago. But he didn't, and here's now the dilemma becomes more acute. He didn't want to bring the case relying on West Virginia state law. He didn't want to bring it in the state courts of West Virginia. And as you read the book, you'll get a sense of how powerful, perhaps, the mining interests were in that state. And the concern, of course, on his part was that the state court judges in West Virginia possibly then would be biased toward the mining interest and how they processed the lawsuit. You might say that's unfair, but that was, I think, a well-founded concern that he had. So now he wants to bring the case, and I said wanted to be in the case. Sorry for the typo. You can see I typed this one. He wanted to bring the case in federal court. And his dilemma was, well, how could he bring the claim in federal court when the claim relied on state law? And his answer to that dilemma was to rely on a form of jurisdiction that gives or provides power in the federal courts to handle some cases where the plaintiffs are relying on state law, and that is known as diversity jurisdiction. We're going to be saying more, and you'll be reading more about diversity jurisdiction in the future in this course, but for now what we could say is diversity jurisdiction will exist if you've got a monetary claim brought by a citizen of one state against a citizen of another state, and if the amount sought in the claim exceeds $75,000. I don't think I've got the $75K in this particular posting, but we talk about it later. So now we look and see if Stern has this diversity jurisdiction. And again, he runs into a dilemma, or as I put it here, the rub, however, was that the owner of the dams that caused the disaster was a West Virginia corporation, Buffalo Mining Company. So now what would happen is if the plaintiffs, who were West Virginia folks, and they were, sued the West Virginia corporation, the Buffalo Mining Company, and it would be on a claim under state law, there would be no diversity jurisdiction, and the federal court couldn't handle the claim, and Stern and his clients would be relegated to the state courts of West Virginia, where they most decidedly did not want to be. So when they did some investigation, they noted that or found out that the mining company, the West Virginia corporation, was what we call a wholly that's not wholly, but wholly owned subsidiary of a New York corporation, the Pittston Company. And if somehow the Pittston Company could be made the defendant, then there would be diversity jurisdiction, because in that case the plaintiffs would be from West Virginia and the defendant, the party being sued, would be a New York citizen because it was a New York corporation. So we now run into a rule that I suspect you'll talk a lot about in the business structures course when you take it, or you've already taken the course and know about this, and it's called corporate limited liability. And what does that mean? The owners of a corporation are not personally liable for the corporation's obligations. So let's just, I'm making this up, let's assume that I've got $5,000 worth of corporate ownership, or my shares in a corporation. My ownership in a corporation is to the extent of $5,000. All I can lose in the event that the corporation has a liability is the extent of my investment, or in this case, $5,000. And so you could say then, viewed in that light, I have limited liability. The Pittston Corporation was the only owner, as we say, the sole owner of West Virginia, the Buffalo Mining Company, the West Virginia Corporation. And the Pittston Corporation is not liable for the Buffalo Mining Company. You can't successfully sue them because of this limited liability. So Stern had to figure out an exception to the limited liability rule. And there is one, and it's found in the concept of piercing the corporate veil. And as I have in the handout, piercing the corporate veil refers to instances when courts put aside the limited liability rule and hold the owners personally liable for corporate conduct. And basically what one has to show, and this is so difficult, it's a real bold move or bold strategy. You've got to show that the corporation is no more or less than the puppet of the owner. So what Stern was going to have to show is that the Buffalo Mining Company really was run by, not just owned by, but run by, if you can appreciate the difference between owned and run by, the New York Corporation. And the book doesn't really, that Stern wrote, I think perhaps in a fit of modesty, he doesn't give himself the credit for what I, again, consider to be a real daring strategy. But so what he ends up doing then is he sues the Pittston Company in federal court. It's a claim of state law, but he's got diversity jurisdiction. But for that claim to prevail, he knows he needs to show not only that there was negligence and recklessness, but he needs to pierce the corporate veil, and he's going to need to show that the New York Corporation was running the West Virginia Corporation. I think if we keep these things in mind, the difference between federal law and state law and how that plays out for jurisdiction of federal courts and corporate limited liability and the way to get around it by piercing the corporate veil, we can appreciate better what I consider to be a rather amazing story about how Stern was able to obtain at least a modicum, a little bit at least, of justice for these people who were absolutely devastated by the Buffalo Creek disaster. So this will end this recording.